I mean, is that a cardinal sin in your book of by not being there that early?
If you're hunting in a bedding area in a pressured state during the pre-rut, yeah, that's a cardinal sin. Absolutely. Totally.
John, how's it going?
It's going great. How about you?
It's going well here. I think we recorded maybe midsummer last year. I'm trying to recall, maybe it was closer to August. So I'm excited to hear about your season and everything else, but it's always a pleasure to talk with you. I appreciate you taking the time to record. And before then you were getting ready to retire, and now you are in the sunset phase. You are in retirement. How's that going?
I'm officially retired from my main job, which was a sales rep in the hunting and fishing category for the last 30 some years. And I've repped for some of the biggest manufacturers of hunting and fishing equipment in the world. Mm-hmm. And I absolutely loved my job because I've repped so many different categories of product lines and garments and boots and blinds and tree stands and fishing rods and lures. I know a lot about it. I know how the industry works. I know how marketing works. And so I'm pretty blunt when I give replies. When I'm posting stuff on YouTube and then I reply or on Facebook, I'm pretty blunt. And a lot of people take that as arrogant. But I just happen to know 100% for a fact how it works. And I just tell it the way it is.
Well, it's worked for you. And, I think there's value in that. Let me ask you this. So obviously being an outdoor rep for 30 years, how have you seen the industry change over the last 30 years? For maybe something good and maybe something that you're not so happy about.
Well, as far as the good side, that's pretty easy. Back when I started clothing, especially clothing garments, like there was not any good waterproof garments. Most of them had a heavy, like a rubber interior, and they were noisy and scrunchy. And so the garment industry has changed for the better big time. Obviously, Sunlock wasn't around back when I started. And I'm a big activated carbon fan, so I'm a big Sunlock fan. But waterproof garments have just changed dramatically. Boots have changed for the better, and they've changed for the worse, because back in the early 90s or late in the 70s and 80s, most rubber boots like Red Ball and Service and Hodgman, they were like 80-85% rubber. Well, nowadays, because they have to hit certain price points to keep up with the Walmart stuff that they bring in, they have to be somewhat competitive. They've all the main companies went offshore over into Asia, and they're 35-40% rubber, so they don't last as long. They dry rot faster. But the insulation they use in them is better. So they work better for a shorter period of time as far as keeping your feet warm. And the soles have become better with vibro soles and stuff. So boots have changed. Obviously, tree stands have changed. Back in the late 80s, it was very common to have metal tree stands that creaked when you shifted your weight. I mean, I'm a saddle guy. I've hunted out of a saddle since 1981, but I've repped a lot of tree stands. API, Rhino, Big Dog. Big Dog's another one. Several other ones as well. So I've repped a lot of tree stands. And over the years, they've progressed to the point where when you use a tree stand, they don't creak when you shift your weight. They're made out of aluminum now, most of the better ones. So they're lighter weight. But I'm still not a tree stand guy. I would never hunt out of a tree stand. But I'm just saying tree stands have made
a lot of improvements,
huge improvements over the years. And on the fishing side, fishing rods, the graphite component, the sensitivity of rods. I rep for Shakespeare, Pfluger, Berkeley, Garcia, Mitchell, Johnson. I think I've repped for every fishing company, then Daiwa, Zebco, and Shimano. And that goes for fishing rods as well. So all of that's changed. Lures have changed. Fishing monofilaments, lines have changed for the better. So a lot of things have changed for the better. Probably the most negative thing to me is not necessarily in the manufacturing standpoint, in the hunting aspect, and this may come from the egotistical side of me, but I'm going to say it anyway. There was a day back in the 70s and 80s and throughout the early 90s, maybe even into the late 90s, depending on the state you're in, where your skill set dictated what you shot as far as mature bucks. And that's not the case anymore. There's so much land management going on. People with the financial means are buying or leasing land. They micromanage it. They don't have any competition, which is obvious with the TV guys. It's like hunting in an enclosure almost to watch some of the TV shows. So the skill set's been taken out of the bow hunting aspect, in my opinion, because now, and it may be good, there's just lots and lots of hunters now killing big bucks every year because of where they're hunting. Where that was not the case 30, 20 years ago and prior to that. Your skill set dictated your success, your consistent success rate. Obviously, somebody can luck out and kill one big buck or two in their lifetime, but to be consistently successful back in those days, you had to have a pretty deep skill set on the bow hunting end.
I also think that the definition of a big buck has changed too, from the 70s and 80s to today. Obviously, the scoring hasn't changed, and Boone and Crockett then is still Boone and Crockett now. But I would say there's more really high end deer that are getting killed as well, and that's probably a product to.
There is no question about that. Even in Michigan, I mean, Wisconsin and Ohio, they've been practicing land management way, way beyond earlier than Michigan. Wisconsin, for instance, they enter 550 to 600 PMY bucks every year. Michigan, with 60, 70,000 more bow hunters, enters about 70. So 70 versus almost 600 with 60, 70,000 more bow hunters. But in Michigan, when I first started repping, and I'd go in my stores, my retail accounts, almost every store would have some sort of a cork board, where they would have their local customers come in and they'd put the pictures of the deer they shot, the bigger bucks on the wall. And it was rare to see a buck over 110 inches. To be 110 inches up where I'm at, it's at least a 3.5-year-old deer. 2.5-year-old deer never go 110 inches up here. At least they never used to prior to management, minerals, food plots. So back then, 110-inch deer was a monster. It was a literal monster. And nowadays, when I go in the stores, you don't see 110-inch deer on the wall. They're all, 120s to 150s, and an occasional 160 and possibly a 170.
Yeah, so that's interesting. Yeah, for sure. Now, I guess last time we discussed your out of state strategies. Obviously, you just hunted in Kansas, but before we get into that, I want to talk about how did your Michigan season go?
Oh, it went okay. I've got 2 pieces of private that I hunt, and then I've got quite a few public lands that I hunt. And I did take a book buck in Michigan on one of the private pieces. I rattled him in. I rattled in 26 bucks this year.
Wow.
Yeah, most of them were out of standing corn because even on public land, where public land butted up to private standing corn, I was rattling bucks out of there. But only 2 of them were shooters, and the one that I didn't shoot, I just didn't get the opportunity. But I did rattle him in. I just didn't get the shot.
I'm really curious because that's a lot of bucks, and obviously with a commonality of standing corn. Were you doing that morning, evenings, midday, all the above, or when did you find the most success rattling up against standing corn?
I'd say morning and midday were probably equal. Yeah, I can remember I was in a swamp one day on public land, and I rattled in 4 bucks at the same time. But they all came in as a bachelor group, and I'm rattling. Primarily, most of the bucks I've rattled in were like from October 1 through, I'd say, October 20. So it wasn't during the pre-rut.
Yeah, earlier than what most people probably think.
Yeah, I'm rattling. When you can set up along a standing cornfield and rattle during the October lull without interrupting your rut phase locations back in the timber, that's a free hunt, in my opinion. That's a free hunt because you're not screwing with anything back in the timber. So yeah, I'd say mornings were about the same. On that one time I was on public and I was back in a swamp, because a lot of times when I'm scouting and I get some locations back in the bedding areas on public lands, if I know I'm not going to go hunt those spots during the rut phases because I've got other spots that I think are going to be better, there's a very good chance I'll go back into those bedding areas during that October lull time and just do a rattle sequence because I'm back in the bedding areas. But now when I'm doing that, it has to be a morning, because obviously I've got to go in there way before daylight because they're going to transition back into the bedding area shortly before daylight. So I've got to already be there. I couldn't go in there with a midday entry for an evening rattle sequence because I'm going to spook berry deer I'm trying to rattle in. Mm-hmm. So I rattled in 4 bucks at one time. They were all small. There was one 2.5-year-old, probably an 80-inch 8-point, which was a nice buck. And then another time I rattled 4 different bucks out of a standing cornfield. I actually have that on one of my YouTube videos. Mm-hmm. One of them was decent. And when he actually came into view, I put the camera down because I was filming these other bucks. I put the camera down, but I didn't get a shot at him, and I don't know that I would have shot him anyway. But he was a pretty decent buck. Mm-hmm. But most of them were just right on the edge of standing corn. And a few others were in bedding areas. I'd say 26. I'm thinking maybe 8 or 9 were in bedding areas. All the rest were on the edge of standing corn.
Where do you think those? Obviously, some of them were in the bedding areas, but where do you think some of those bucks were coming? Were they hanging out in the corn, still feeding absolutely. In the morning?
Yeah. Every one of them I rattled from the edge of the cornfield came out of the corn.
Interesting.
Every. Yeah.
Very interesting. So, I mean, I think that's that brings up a point right now. If someone's thinking, well, I want to have some more opportunities during the lull or during the early part of October, most of the country is on a bean and corn rotation. So if you can find some spots that will likely be corn next year, mark that down and scout it. So let's break down. Someone goes and they're looking for a field that's going to be corn next year. And what does some of those setups look like to where I assume, where's the wind going? Where are you located? Can you break that down a little bit more?
I don't pay attention to wind. So yeah, wind is irrelevant to me.
Yeah. Fair enough.
So what I'm doing is when I'm out there doing my postseason scouting and I'm walking along any type of a field edge, if there's good transition security cover on the timber side, there's good security cover where a buck will physically come through that, or a buck coming out of the corn will feel comfortable coming to the edge of the corn because he's got security cover on the timber side as well. That's the type of spot I would rattle. Let's say I was walking in and I was scouting and I knew this field was going to be in standing corn, and here's this nice tree, nice huntable tree, but on the timber side, let's say there's a 40 or 50 yard opening of weeds, short weeds or something, till it gets down into a swamp or decent security cover timber. I'm not going to set that up because the odds of a big buck stepping out of the standing corn and being vulnerable with that big open area to that one side in a heavily pressured area is pretty low. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking for a tree that's going to have some good security cover around it. So when a buck does come out of the standing corn, he will feel comfortable coming to its edge because there's more security cover beyond the edge of that standing corn.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. No, that makes perfect sense. And I think that's a good illustration. I could picture some spots.
And one more thing, let me throw in on that, is if this is really important. If I'm scouting the edge of crop fields and because it's very common when you're scouting the edge of crop fields during full season to see scrapes that were there the previous fall. Mm-hmm. And so if there's a scrape area where there's 2 or 3 scrapes in a short zone, a small zone, and there's a tree there within shooting distance to the scrapes, and there is adequate security cover on the timber side, that's going to be the spot I set up on, because those scrapes are there for a reason. Mm-hmm. They're there because that's probably a spot where does are transitioning from timber to corn, even if it's picked after mm-hmm. the cornfield's picked. So those scrapes are there because that's a transition zone into the crop field or from the crop field back into the timber where they may bed during the daytime once the corn is down. So there's a reason those scrapes are there. So that's going to add a little bit of positivity to that location as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up because I think that really narrows it down for someone to listen to this right now and go find those spots right now as season's over in a lot of states. And from the conversations that I've had and some of the information I've covered with you in the past is postseason scouting would you say it's paramount to success for the following year?
I think postseason scouting is probably one of the most important aspects of bow hunting in a pressured area. Mm-hmm. When you're in managed properties, you can get away with a lot because deer are allowed to grow to 3 or 4.5 years old before they ever have any negative consequences with human activity. So, you can get away with a lot of things in managed areas. But when you're hunting in a pressured area where just about every hunter, and there's lots of them, are targeting any legal antlered buck. Those deer, those mature bucks, when they get 3.5 years old, they're really, really smart. So for you to go in and do your scouting during preseason, and you're leaving your human odor more than likely, you're making an intrusion presence. You're just cluing them off that deer season's coming. You know, they've been through this before, and you're just setting them up to become nocturnal prior to the season even opening by doing preseason scouting in those types of areas.
When you go find a spot, let's say you're postseason scouting now and you're looking for this type of setup, you're going in and you're actually prepping a lot of these trees, right?
Yeah, typically what I'll do is I'll do all my postseason scouting, and then I'll note places of interest. And then once I scout a particular piece of property, public or private, which I haven't hunted a new piece of private in 20 years. So it's primarily on public. Once I have those locations that I think I want to set up marked, if I don't have any other place to go scout, yeah, I'll begin setting those up. But if I have like 3 or 4 pieces of public land that I want to scout, what I'll typically do is I'll scout all of those first. You know, I want to get all my scouting done before green up starts, which is typically in Michigan around the end of April. And then once I get everything scouted, it got my locations marked that I want to prep. Then I've got, you know, May and June to go in and physically prep the locations. And the sooner you can get them prepped, the better. Mm-hmm. And when I say prepping on public land, you do whatever you can. You go in and you mark, whether it be on Onyx or with trail markers, you mark your entry and exit routes. You move brush out of runways. You make shooting lanes the best that you can, so that when you do come back and hunt them during season, there's not much effort in just getting in there and hunting.
Yeah, it makes that first sit truly a first sit versus going in and boogering it up. So that makes a lot of sense. And before we get into some other items here, we talked about your out-of-state strategy on how you typically, you know, break down a 7-day hunt or 6-day hunt. You found success in Kansas, and we talked a little bit last night that it was a pretty interesting year.
It was a very interesting year. It was a wake-up call for us. There was nothing we could do about it. My sons, John and Joe, they've been going with me since John has since probably 2008, 2007, I think. So John's been out there like 11 or 12 times, and there's only been one season he has not taken a deer. I've been out there, I think, 15 times, and there's been 2 seasons I have not taken a deer because my criteria was well over 125. And I could have taken 125s, but I wasn't after that. So this year, well, let me go back a little bit. We usually go during postseason or post run. So we leave our house on November 16th. Our gun season opens November 15th. We leave November 16th. We arrive in Kansas around November 16th in the evening, probably around 10 or 11 o'clock, because we leave at like 5 a.m. So then we go to bed. We get up in the morning on the 17th. We scout the first 2 days. The first 2 days, all we do is scout and prep locations and put out cameras. And we pretty much hunt everything per the cameras, which you guys saw. We're huge Exodus camera fans. They're super easy to use, and the cell service works just about everywhere on those cameras. And we've used other cell cameras, and we've really been impressed with yours.
Great to hear.
Yeah, well, I'm not saying that because you're there. That's just a fact.
Appreciate it.
So anyway, we're out there during post rut, and what we've noticed, we usually start hunting on the morning of the 19th or the evening of the 19th, and we usually are there until the 27th or 28th. So we take an extended, we take a 10 or 11 days.
Yeah.
We do not want to feel rushed, especially because we're scouting and prepping locations for 2 days, and it's a day to drive out there and a day to drive back. So we want to be able to hunt 7 days. So we start hunting on the 19th, and we will see 125s and 130s and 135s, and of course a lot of 4 points and 6 points and year and a half old stuff. But we rarely see, while we're in the tree, the 4 and 5-year-olds that we're after. We get them on cameras at night, but we don't see them in the daytime because they're typically doed up. They're with does, because out there, it's the dominant bucks that get the breeding does. So that's why we're seeing the 2.5s, 1.5s, 2.5s, and an occasional 3.5. We're not seeing the 4 and 5.5-year-olds. It's almost to the day, and I've got 15 years experience on this, so I've got stats. Almost to the day, on the 22nd to the 23rd, we start seeing those bigger bucks that we have on camera, because all the does are bred now. Pretty much 90+% of the does are bred. So now they have to get up off their butts and actually go out and search, just like they did during the pre-rut, for those late estrus does. Pre-rut, they're searching for early estrus does. Post-rut, they're searching for late estrus does. Now, they've been breeding and doed up for the last 2.5 weeks. So their testosterone is still high, and they've lost a lot of body weight. Their eyes are kind of glazed over. They're kind of in a little bit of a fog when you see one, to be honest with you. You can just tell they're tired. They're worn out, but they're still driven to breed does. And one thing we've noticed over the years is by the 22nd or 23rd, on average, about 50% of the bucks that we see have busted up antlers to the point where we would not shoot them. But there's enough mature bucks out there in Kansas where there's enough of them left that are pretty much intact, maybe a broken brow tine or a broken G4 on a 10-point or something, that we will shoot them. This year, because it was so arid out there, they had 0.35 inches of rain from June 1 through November 15th when we got there. I talked to several farmers, and they keep track of that. One farmer I talked to, he was picking soybeans, and he got four bushel of beans per acre. So he basically picked 2 or 3 acres just to prove to the insurance company so he could collect his insurance, because they all get crop insurance out there because it's so arid. So it's my opinion, and I've had other guys from Kansas tell me the same thing, and I even had a guy from Nebraska and a guy from Iowa tell me the same thing, that 2022 there was a lot more busted up racks, and I think it was because it was so arid. The same moisture levels and minerals it takes to grow crops is what it takes to grow antlers, and density of the antlers. So I think the density of the antlers was not quite what it normally is, and I think they just busted a lot easier. 90% of the bucks that we had on camera or physically saw after the 22nd or 23rd were busted up. 90%.
Wow.
That's why I didn't shoot anything when we were out there that first time, and that's why I went back. And then the one I shot, when I went back by myself on December 15th, he had 2 broken tines. He had a broken G3 and a broken G4 on his left side.
That's crazy. Those are just one of those variables, obviously, you can't control.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just another lesson learned. That's exciting, though. So you were able to make that second trip because you retired, right?
Well, I actually didn't legally retire till the end of the year. They were paying me through the end of the year, but they hired my replacement like on October 17th. So he was doing all my work. So I literally didn't do anything after October 17th.
Yeah. Well earned.
Yeah. Yes. And the one other cool thing about post-rut, when you go out there post-rut, all the non-residents are gone. You got the place to yourself.
Yeah.
Everybody that goes out west, from the Northeast and the Southeast and along the Atlantic coastal states, everybody that travels west, they always go out either in late October, early November, or during the rut in mid-November, or early to mid-November. Yeah. Nobody goes out there in late November.
So tell us a little bit about that setup, though, in December when you ended up tagging that buck.
I didn't actually video the actual kill, because I usually, when I'm in a spot, I'll kind of video the area. And if I see something small coming through, I'll video it. But I was literally 3 or 4 yards off the corner of a house that had been abandoned in 1985.
Oh, wow.
So here's this big house. I videoed the house. I videoed the roof. The roof is half gone. The shingles are all gone. There's holes in the roof. It's falling apart. but it's a bigger house, and there's a bedding area. The house is to my northeast, literally 4 yards to the front door. And then to the north, there's a big CRP type bedding area. To the west, there's a lot of plum brush and big cottonwoods and bedding area up there. And then to the southeast, about probably 3/8 of a mile, there's a crop field. I don't remember this year if it was soybeans or picked corn, but it's not on the same property. This was a 40-acre piece. So the deer coming out of the bedding area to the north, when they were coming in, that house has been there so long, and all the, you know how houses will have brush growing around them, just little evergreens to dress up the house. Well, all that stuff's huge. And I'm in a tree several yards off the corner of the house, and there's a big cedar tree right behind me to basically, it helped block the wind, and it also helped my visual as far as getting picked. I had a background cover coming from either direction. So it was 45-mile-an-hour winds when I shot this deer, and it was 13 degrees. So I don't know what the wind chill would have been, but the deer, when they were coming out of the bedding area from the north and the northwest, they were cutting the corner, literally cutting the actual corner right by my tree to go around that house. That house actually acted as a pinch point.
Yeah.
And that's what I used it as. And that's where I shot that buck.
That is certainly unique.
And it's in the video.
Yeah, I will certainly watch that. That's I think most people probably wouldn't think that necessarily, but that's very cool. I think a lot of the times too, like this stuff that's abandoned or old pasture that's been completely abandoned, those are always very exciting to walk, just with general deer sign. So anyhow, that's very exciting. So I want to dive into some more things. Obviously, I read this on the site here today, but basically there's an old saying, it's not the bow, it's the Indian. And your goal is to help folks become better Indians. So where do you think most people fall short when hunting pressured whitetails? If there was a common theme that you have seen, or this is just what your gut feeling is?
Can I be honest?
You can be honest.
I think the majority of hunters are just lazy. I really do. I've hunted with a lot of hunters, and a lot of what were supposed to be really hardcore hunters, and I've never been impressed with their work ethic. I've never been impressed with their entry routes and their exit routes, and how early they got in their trees on morning hunts, and how frequently they hunted their locations. They overhunted their locations. To me, most hunters tend to overhunt their locations. The biggest advantage you can have in deer hunting, period, is scent control. I don't pay attention to wind, and it blows my mind that most hunters don't take advantage of activated carbon technology, so they don't have to pay attention to wind. Whether that's because they're too lazy, I have no clue. Or maybe they're on somebody's pro staff, so they can't. But to not take advantage of that type of technology, which is that's a whitetail's biggest defense, is their nose. And to be able to not even pay attention to their nose and just hunt wherever you want, whenever you want, is a huge, huge advantage. So overhunting locations, not taking advantage of the current technology that's out there, not getting in their trees early enough on morning hunts.
How early? I mean, I'm sure it depends on the setup, but how early is a rule of thumb that you need to be there before shooting light? Because I know you get in. I mean, to me and most people, it's an early, very, very early.
I'm in my tree. Not when I go out of state. When I go out of state, I drop my standards big time on how I hunt. But when I'm in Michigan, I'm in my tree, set up, quiet, an hour and a half before daylight, especially during pre-rut. Because a lot of times, once it gets into the rut phases and the crops are picked, I'm hunting a lot of bedding areas. So when you're hunting in bedding areas, you have to get in there and be set up way before any mature bucks are going to be coming in. And usually mature bucks in heavily pressured areas, they're transitioning into the bedding areas, at least a half an hour before daybreak. Mm-hmm. And once they get into the bedding areas, then they feel secure because they can hear anything else coming into the bedding areas. Because no hunters go in bedding areas that early in the morning. So they feel kind of comfortable. So they'll continue moving around, and they may not bed down until, let's say, half an hour or hour after daybreak. And they're very vulnerable to rattle sequences once they're in there too. So being in there and set up an hour and a half before daylight during pre-rut, especially in bedding areas, is a big deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, quite literally. I think people use the phrase "beat them back to bed," but
yes,
I think if you're getting there at the, where a lot of, I mean, I've been guilty of this, of just not being there early enough, which is that, I mean, is that a cardinal sin in your book of by not being there that early in some of those
if you're hunting in a bedding area in a pressured state
mm-hmm.
during the pre-rut, yeah, that's a cardinal sin. Absolutely. Totally. You put all this work into scouting, prepping this location. You probably prepped it during postseason if it's in a bedding area. Getting up in the morning, putting on your clothes, practicing with your bow, and to sleep in an extra half hour or an hour instead of being in that tree when you're supposed to be in there to beat the deer into the bedding area. Yeah, I consider that. It's not a sin. It's just being lazy.
Yeah.
It's just a fact. I mean, there's no other way of putting it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, there's no way around it. And I think sometimes that's, that's just part of getting better, of identifying some areas that you can improve on. And if that's something you aren't currently doing and you can improve on it, then hopefully your success will increase, which is obviously what's always been your goal of helping people. I think no one would do all the things that you've done over the course of your career if you didn't have a passion for actually helping people, in my opinion. I mean, from the books you wrote, the time you take to write articles for magazines, that's time out of your schedule to do that. And you're doing it to help other people.
Do you realize how much I love getting emails from guys that send me pictures of nice bucks that they've shot because they're paying no attention to the wind? They got in their tree early enough. I got an email from a guy I don't remember, from Michigan. He shot a 150 some inch buck down in Kalamazoo County because I posted a rattle deal on my YouTube channel in late September, and he tried it on a long-standing cornfield, and he rattled in for Michigan 150, I think it was 152 incher. He rattled that in and came right out of the cornfield. He said it got right to the base of his tree, and it was just looking around for the action, and he greened it. And I mean that to me is just very gratifying. Mm-hmm. And I will say this about that early arrivals. Hunting early in the morning and getting up that early every day is a pain in the ass. There is no question. It's difficult, and you have to do it 50 times for the one time it helps. You know what I mean? It's like all day sits. You sit all day, a half a dozen times during the course of the season, and there's some season it doesn't work out. So you think, well, I'm not going to do that anymore. Yet you'll hunt evenings for the rest of your life, and maybe one out of every 40 evening hunts is successful, but you've abandoned midday hunting because it wasn't successful 4 times in a row. You just can't let numbers kind of throw you off on what you should be doing. Mm-hmm. Because stats wise, like midday hunting during the rut phases, statistically, I have taken 21 bucks from November 1 in Michigan through November 14. So that's a 15-day period, I guess. So 21 bucks, and 7 of those bucks were shot between 11 o'clock and 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So midday. I consider 11 to 3 midday. So that's 33%. Okay. 33% of my bucks were taken during midday, while less than 8% of my time spent on stand during all that period was during midday. Usually I'm hunting mornings and evenings. So in an 8% of my time on stand, I've killed over 30% of the bucks during that time frame.
When you frame it that way, it's hard to argue. Hard to argue that.
You can't argue.
Yeah, that's just the facts of it. So, but I think people fall into people. We talk about bucks being habitual. People are habitual. Even just talking about how you go to Kansas, like the 16th is when we head out there because of Michigan gun season, everything else. Like we as humans are just as habitual, whether that's a good habit or a bad habit. We're all victims to it.
Yeah, yeah, yep, yeah. We're definitely died into that time frame, into that time slot because it's worked for us.
Yeah, for sure. Now, speaking of kind of just some general stats here, I mean, you've so of the 30 some odd book bucks in Michigan that you've shot, 20 different properties in 10 different counties, which just means that
11
you're
different counties now.
11. Okay, 11 different counties. Would you say people not expanding their hunting area is something that hamstrings them? Meaning, this is once again, it kind of comes back to being habitual. Like, these are the farms I hunt, these are the spots that I hunt. Regardless, that's what I'm always going to do. Where it seems like you have obviously expanded because you're just looking for the next good spot. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think so. I think a good percentage of hunters have their own property or family properties that they hunt, and or you've got some leased land and managed property. And obviously, if you're hunting somewhat managed property, there's no reason to go anyplace else because you're probably going to be relatively successful because you've got multiple mature bucks on your property. But when you're hunting in a pressured state and you're strictly hunting free permission or public land, uh, yeah, most of the properties you go to hunt are not going to have anything on it that you want to kill. I mean, that's just how rare, book bucks are. So you have to have a lot of options to hunt. Every year I'll have a minimum of 40 trees ready to go on day one. I may only hunt a dozen of them during the course of the year because crop rotations may have changed things, or the oaks that didn't produce acorns this year, or the apple trees didn't produce apples. Scrape areas changed due to mast and crop rotations. There's just a lot of issues that go into every location, but I'll have a lot of locations. So if something does come to fruition in an area, usually I've got a tree there ready to hunt.
That's interesting. So out of 40 spots, you may only hunt 12 of them there in Michigan.
Yeah.
That's and it's
well,
just,
yeah, you got to look. Yeah, you got to look at crop rotations. The years like this year, almost everything I had that bordered corn was the standing corn stayed up for quite a long time. So I love hunting along the edge of standing corn. I rattled in a lot of bucks. I only shot one, but still one in Michigan is pretty damn good. And, now next year, if those are transferred into beans, that scenario is not going to happen because I'm not going to rattle a buck out of that transition area of security cover on the timber side to the edge of a standing or a picked bean field because it's a short crop. And they're just not going to stand on the edge of that big of an opening and be vulnerable in Michigan. So, things change from year to year, from tree to tree, based on mass production, scrape areas, crop rotations, and even pinch points in transition security cover. A lot of times they bed in different areas from year to year, so they transition differently.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. I mean, I see that on some of the farms that I hunt, and it is a night and day difference when it's corn versus beans. And the first time, I think when we recorded the Whitetail Cribs with you, in whatever it was 2020 or 2019.
That was fun. I loved that.
Yeah, that was I enjoyed that, and a lot of people did as well. But that was one of my biggest key takeaways from that day, and I was like, dang, once you look back and realize that's there's a lot of validity in that from just what I've seen. So talking about stats and things over the years of the 53 book bucks. So this is with your sons as well, but obviously 46 of them were taken with a saddle throughout
48 or 9 now.
So basically, all of your bucks have been out of saddles, and
pretty much,
and that has obviously gotten a lot more market adoption in the last couple of years. Yep. It's more people are doing that. So for someone that is still on the fence, what's your pitch for a saddle? Especially now that there's some lightweight tree stands as well. I just want to hear it.
Mobility. Mobility, a saddle. Glad you asked. I was prepared for this question, even though I did not know it was coming.
So he's grabbing some things from the bag there for anyone that's listening.
I have my backpack, which I haven't touched since deer season. Deer season's over for me, but it's still full of my junk from the last day I hunted. This is my tree stand. This weighs a little over 2 pounds. This is my saddle and my tree tether. This is what I hook up to the tree with and everything. This is it. So this is made out of fabric. It never makes any noise. It's always with me. Nobody can hunt my stands when I'm not there. I can hunt out of a 4-foot diameter tree. I can hunt out of a 4-inch diameter tree. I can hunt out of a 15-degree leaning tree. Nobody's going to know if on public land when they're scouting where my location is, because this is with me. Nobody can hunt my stand when I'm not there because this is with me. With a saddle, especially when you're hunting at a destination location, let's say you're hunting at a white oak or whatever it may be, a persimmon tree in the south, or you're hunting over a scrape area. With a saddle, you can pick a tree where you're going to be literally 180 degrees on the opposite side of the tree as the destination feeding or scrape area. So at a destination feeding location, there's going to be multiple deer come in at a time. You know, typically if it's an evening sit, which at a feeding location, that's strictly an evening spot because you'd spook deer feeding there with a morning entry. So on an evening sit, you're going to have multiple deer come in, and usually they're coming in before the mature buck is going to. He's going to be the last one, probably just before dark, to come in. So you have to make sure none of those deer pick you. So with the saddle, you're 180 degrees on the back side of the tree. You got the tree as a hiding buffer, whereas with a tree stand, if it's a tree that's anything bigger than an 18-inch diameter, you have to have your tree stand kind of kicked off to the side a little bit, where when those deer are feeding, they're lifting their heads up, at least in Michigan, and they're looking around, their ears are twitching. You know what I'm talking about. And it's just easier to get picked in a tree stand because your body profile is sticking somewhat off to the side of the tree. And that's especially true during the rut phases. And during the rut phases is when 60+% of all mature bucks that are in the record book are taken in every state. So when the foliage is down, it's easier to get picked when you're hunting a tree stand versus this. Because with this, you're behind the tree, peeking around the corner, and then when the shot opportunity comes, you just simply slide to the side and take the shot. You're not carrying a cumbersome stand with you. If you're freelancing on public land, you're going to have a backpack, you're going to have a bow, and now you're going to have a cumbersome metal stand on your back. You know, if you're hunting pressured areas, you're bucking brush, you're going through junk, and you're going to be cussing and swearing and sweating your butt off because you got this thing catching up on you. So that's another thing. This here either will fit in my backpack or I can wear it while I'm physically entering the woods for a hunt. This will never, ever, when I shift my weight, make a noise like tree stands used to do. Not so much anymore, but used to do. And I actually have a document with like 20 different things that this has advantages over a tree stand. And it's more comfortable. It's far. Let me rephrase that. If you hunt out of a saddle properly, it's more comfortable than a tree stand. There are a lot of saddles out there that are extremely uncomfortable. And that's one reason I have my own saddle. You know, this is an Eberhart signature saddle. And as far as I'm concerned, this is the most comfortable saddle made. And this is the exact same as the saddle I bought in 1981. So I really have made zero design changes to the 1981 saddle. So it's more comfortable than a tree stand. You can shoot better out of a saddle because when you're in a saddle, you have your feet on something solid, either on a platform or you're on steps. So they're solidly planted, and probably 70% of your weight is in your butt. It's in the seat of the seat. So whenever you maneuver around the tree in any direction, you've got 3 solid body points of contact. When you're on a tree stand, there's a lot of times where you physically stand on the stand to turn and shoot certain directions.
Oh, yeah.
You're balancing yourself. So there is no balancing act with a saddle. You've got serious, solid contact with the tree, and you will definitely shoot better, more active. There's other reasons, but that's some of it.
Yeah.
Some of the
Well, I think, there's a lot of people that it's
safety. I got to throw in safety.
Sure.
Can't fall out of a saddle. There's been tens of thousands of people fall out of tree stands. Typically, it's when they're either stepping into the tree stand or stepping out of the tree stand onto their climbing apparatus. But they still have fallen. With a saddle, you are tethered to the tree 100% of the time.
That's a fair point, too. So there's some people that just think saddles are just, I don't know. Some people just don't like them. So you think that's just Would you encourage them to try it? Because I mean, I still hunt out of it. I'm talking to the saddle godfather here, and I still hunt out of a tree stand a lot.
Yeah.
I tried hunting out of a saddle, but the key word was using it properly. And I just threw the thing on, and I know for a fact I was not using it correctly.
What saddle were you using? Can I ask?
I I'm
Please don't say Hawk.
No, no, it was a cruiser saddle. And I can't. I'm ashamed to say I don't even know what model it was.
That's okay.
But yeah, I tried it, and it was in the middle of deer season, and to your point, a lot of the things that you discussed, there was some trees that I wanted to get in that would have been a little bit more challenging with the tree stand. So I grabbed the saddle and went and did that. I survived. I did a 1 all day sit in a saddle. That was a very long day, but once again, I wasn't using it properly.
I'm gonna tell you what. In my opinion, in a single panel saddle, which that was, they're on long-term sits, they're very uncomfortable, and single panel saddles tend to climb up your back. Yeah. So you find yourself every 10 or 15 minutes lifting your weight up a little bit and pulling it back under your ass. Did you do that?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you do not do that with a 2-panel saddle. My saddle is a 2-panel saddle. Mm-hmm. So with a single panel saddle, almost all of them have a 2-inch wide strap right at the bottom of the actual seat, which basically goes right in the crease of your butt cheeks, right at the base of your butt cheek crease. And then they usually have some sort of fabric or mesh up the saddle. And then there's another 2-inch wide strap up at the top, which is usually up around where your belt would be on a pair of pants. Mm-hmm. Okay. So whenever you maneuver around in a single panel saddle, because you were always moving around and looking and doing things. And when you do that, you're actually causing that upper strap to slightly rise a little bit. It may be a 64th of an inch each time, but when that rises, it's pulling the bottom up from underneath your ass. Okay? That's why you're finding yourself pulling it down all the time. And then another thing with all single panel saddles, in my opinion, and I'm on Tethered's Pro staff, and 98% of the saddles they sell are single panel saddles because that's what they push. But single panel saddles, because it has that single strap underneath your butt, and that mesh or fabric between the two straps is not weight bearing fabric. Okay. Your butt just rides in there and it conforms to your butt. With a 2-panel saddle, you've got the bottom panel is 6 inches wide, and there's a 2-inch strap at the bottom and a 2-inch strap at the top of it with a little separator in between. And then the outer panel, the second panel, has a 2-inch strap and another 2-inch strap. It's 6 inches wide as well. So when you take those two panels and you butt them up to each other or slightly overlap them, you're going to have about a 10 to 12-inch seat. Okay? Mm-hmm. But you've got 8 inches of solid weight-bearing straps under your butt. So on a long-term sit, that single strap at the bottom of your butt is not becoming a stress point because all of those 8 2-inch straps are evenly bearing the weight of your body. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, that makes sense. That's one of the things that I need to address this off season and practice a little bit more than instead of just trying to pick it up.
I'll tell you what, if you buy an ESS and send it to me, I'll get it modified just like mine, just like that one. Because they come with stuff you really don't need, in my opinion. Even my ESS comes with leg straps. It comes with things that I take off. Okay. I'll make it so simple it'd be super easy for you.
Well, I'll take you up on it. I mean, it's hard. Okay. It'd feel disrespectful if I didn't.
I'll be more than happy to do that.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate that. And I think, there's a lot of really good points there. And obviously there's more than one way to skin a cat, but I wanted to ask you. So here's another question. This is a commonality from some of the other folks we talked to. When during the postseason, do you spend any time shed hunting, or are you just strictly postseason scouting? If you find a shed along the way, it's a bonus.
If I find a shed along the way, it's a bonus. I never look for sheds.
You think it's kind of a waste of time? For your goals,
I'm looking for deer sign. I don't want to be interrupted by pretending I'm looking for sheds. Yeah, I want to see antlers in my hands, not something that's shed. I mean, if I were hunting a managed piece of property, I could see wanting to find sheds because the odds are that, that buck's going to still be on your property the next year. But on public lands, usually if you find a shed, it's a 6-point or 4-point, something small. You're not out, if you're going out and stomping public land in Michigan looking for,
Yeah.
100, half of a 120-inch 8-point, you may do it for 3 years without ever finding one.
Yeah, definitely reflective to what part of the country you're in, because shed hunting and farm country in Illinois, Iowa, is a lot more fun, and you can scouting and shed hunting kind of go a little bit together. But you won't find me in Michigan looking for sheds, guarantee it.
Yeah, I know guys that'll go out to Kansas or Iowa, and well, more Kansas than Iowa, and they'll ask farmers if they can go looking for sheds in the spring, and the farmers don't usually care. They won't let them hunt because usually they lease the property, they hunt it themselves, and they'll come out with a half a pickup bed full of antlers.
Yeah,
if they're out there for a couple days.
Yeah, well,
and also out there, the antlers stay on the ground for several years. Here the porkies and the mice and stuff eat them for the calcium. Out there, we found sheds out there that were 2-3 years old. They were all
bleached white,
rotted, cracked.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, that's a lot of the things I wanted to cover here today. Another one is kind of just a different question. You can answer this however you want. So this could be about hunting or life. What is something you wish the 25-year-old version of you knew today? So what's the key lesson you learned? So I mean, like I said, could be about anything.
Not to take advantage of my wife and cause a divorce and have my kids go through it. That has nothing to do with hunting, but that's probably the thing I regret the most. Because in my first marriage, if I wasn't working, I was hunting or fishing. I mean, that's all I did. And my wife stayed home with my kids, and yeah, I mean, I took my kids hunting and fishing. Don't get me wrong, but I mean, I was always out doing something, and she never had a life. And when we got divorced, I think it affected my kids.
Sure.
And I regret that.
Well, I mean, you say it's not related to hunting, but it is in some form or fashion. Yeah. It really is. But no, I really appreciate your time. It's always a pleasure to talk and catch up. I'm going to check out a double panel saddle. I'm going to send it to you, and I will be.
I'm looking forward to that.
We'll have to talk about it.
I want to call you, and I'll walk you through it. You will never look at a tree stand again.
I'm excited to hear that. We'll see. I'm going at it with open eyes, but no, like I said, once again, I really appreciate it. Plug, you're posting, you're still writing magazine articles. You're still posting on YouTube a ton. What else do you have going on? I know you have workshops, so feel free to plug everything that you have going on.
Okay. Well, my first workshop for 2023 is full. My first one in April has got like 3 spots left. My third one in April, I still have a lot of openings, and that's on my website at DER-JOHN.net. I was just at Scentlock yesterday designing a new signature 2024 midweight saddle hunter suit. Last year, 2022, they had a saddle hunter suit, a signature that I designed as well. I did very, very well. And it has a lot of features specifically for saddle hunters, but it's also a good suit for any kind of hunter, actually. Pockets are a little bit higher, so you can get into them with a saddle. It's got a 2-way zipper. Collars are a lot different than typical. I don't like most companies' collars. There's a lot of design features on hunting garments that I typically don't like from other manufacturers, and it seems like everybody tries to copy the top manufacturers' garments. So they're all kind of the same. Mm-hmm. So my designs are considerably different. So anyway, I've got that going on. I'm pretty excited about that because the suit that I had for 2022 was insulated. So that cut off half the country. People down in the southern states, they're not going to use an insulated jacket for hunting in 20-degree weather. So this midweight one will fit a lot better for a lot more areas of the country.
That's exciting. Is that a summer release or fall release? September? I mean,
well, the saddle hunter suit from 2022 is going to continue on for 2023. They're changing the knee pads on it because they have knee pads on them for saddle hunting. And they're changing the pattern. The actual pattern is going to be a lot lighter pattern. And then the other one, the midweight's not going to be out until probably June 2024.
Oh yeah, geez.
We're
Okay.
working on this well in advance.
Yeah. Well, people can be excited and look out into the future and earmark their calendar if they have one for 2024 already.
Yes,
Yeah. Awesome.
correct.
Well, I appreciate it, John. As always, I encourage everyone to go check out everything you have going on. I look forward to watching your Kansas hunt. I'm going to watch that here hopefully in the next couple of days. I'm curious to see that setup. So I appreciate it once again. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jake. I appreciate it.